One might say that a difference between melancholy and what we call clinical depression can be rendered causally, meaning, generally, when we think of being melancholy, having the blues, say, or being sorrowful or sad, usually we can locate a source of this. In other words, melancholy is usually situational. We might feel homesick. We might be grieving the loss of a loved one. We might be sad over the breakup of a relationship. We might simply feel sad because we feel insecure or vulnerable. But clinical depression, in contrast, is acausal. You can be on the top of the world. Maybe you've just won a major prize, or you've done well on an exam, or you have indeed connected with a person whose friendship you've been craving or whose romance you've been craving. You can feel these ways, these positive ways, situationally, but then just with the snap of a finger, you can feel horrible, terrible, full of despair, feeling of apathy, indifference, stasis. And for what reason? It's hard to tell. You don't know. So I'm setting up this contrast between situational sadness and clinical depression as a way of entering into Wordsworth's poem Resolution and Independence. Began writing in 1802, probably finished around that time, published it in 1807. Sometimes the poem is known simply as the Leech Gatherer, because the Leech Gatherer, of course, plays a major role in the poem. So the poem opens up with the poet in a resplendent mood. Uh, there was a storm the night before, and now the storm is over. The sunlight is shining on the wet meadow, and what's going on? We hear birds singing. We hear stock doves, for instance, and magpies, and all the things that love the sun are out of doors, not just birds. The sky rejoices in the morning's birth. The grass is bright with raindrops. On the moors, the hare is running races in her mirth. And with her feet, she, the plashy earth, raises a mist that, glittering in the sun, runs with her all the way wherever she doth run. That is my favorite image of Wordsworth, if not in all of British poetry. Imagine a rabbit running over a damp meadow, and every stride splashes up a mist, and the sun shines through the mist, creating this rainbow. So every time the hair splashes, this rainbow appears. Beautiful. And so the poet said, this is amazing. I love it out here. But then in stanza 4, uh, something happens. But as sometimes chanceth, from the might of joy in minds that can no further go, as high as we have mounted in delight, in our dejection do we sink as low. To me that morning did it happen so, and fears and fancies thick upon me came, dim sadness and blind thoughts I knew not nor could name. So now he can still hear the skylark in the sky, but even though he can hear it, he can't feel the joy of hearing it anymore. I heard the skylark warbling in the sky, and I bethought me of the playful hare, even such as a happy child of earth am I. But even as these blissful creatures do I fare, even as these blissful creatures do I fare. Far from the world I walk, and from all care, but there may come another day to me, solitude, pain of heart, distress, poverty. And then he thinks of these poets who ended badly. Chatterton, who committed suicide, and Robert Burns, who basically drank himself to death. And so he concludes stanza 7. We poets in our youth begin in gladness, but thereof come in the end despondency and madness. Feeling grooving out there on the plashy meadow with the rainbow rabbit. And then all of a sudden, oh, I'm really happy now, but what could happen? Um, maybe later on I'll be lonely. Maybe later on my heart will be pained. Maybe I'll be in distress. Maybe I will be impoverished. Maybe I will be so sad I commit suicide, depressed I commit suicide, like Chatterton, or maybe I will try to escape my pains by entering into drink and killing myself slowly that way. So I would say this is a really powerful description of what we would call clinical depression. Wordsworth would not use that language. That language is not available to him then. But it's causeless. It simply overwhelms him, and he says, I don't know where this dim sadness came from. I don't even know if I could name it. So he goes from the top of the world, as it were, to the bottom of the world, just like that. So that's the first half of the poem. And it's a little bit like the Intimations Ode, which, remember, almost ends at the end of stanza 4, and Wordsworth has to sort of whip himself back up to finish writing the poem. Well, here he just almost shuts down into the silence of despair when he sees this man, this old man, a leech gatherer who wanders over the moors and probably dips his legs into these pools and allows the leeches to latch onto his legs. And so he can, of course, gather them up and sell them to apothecaries, because leeches were used as medicine at the time. So he literally gives his blood to provide healing to others. Now, Wordsworth actually saw an old leech gatherer in his life, and this is the basis of the poem. And it's interesting to read Wordsworth's description of the leech gatherer here and to read his sister Dorothy's description of the leech gatherer in her notebook. Hers is much more specific, concrete, really interested in what the leech gatherer looks like, who he is, what his history is. Whereas Wordsworth is simply turning the leech gatherer into a kind of symbol almost immediately. So this is my point. The poem on the surface appears to be about a man falling into this clinical depression, and in encountering this old leech gatherer and in thinking about this old leech gatherer in a certain way, he pulls himself out. He says the leech gatherer doesn't really seem like a man so much as some kind of sea creature on a rock. So there's something eternal, unstable, like a rock, or like a creature on a rock that's not moving. And that stability appeals to this poet who's so mercurial, who can go from happiness to sadness so quickly. So the poet asks, what do you do? And the man tells him what he does. And the poet listens. And as he listens, he seems to think, gosh, I have it a lot better than this guy. I'm not impoverished. I'm not going around getting leeches stuck to my legs. So he's thinking this. And even though he's thinking this, by the time we get to stanza 17, he goes back into that despair again. My former thoughts return, the fear that kills, and hope that is unwilling to be fed, cold pain and labor and all fleshly ills, and mighty poets to their misery dead. Perplexed and longing to be comforted, my question eagerly did I renew. How is it that you live? What is it that you do? Well, he just asked the dude that question like 2 minutes ago, it seems. Hey, man, what do you do? And the leech gatherer starts telling him what he does. Is the poet listening? Not really. He's sort of translating the career of the leech gatherer into a symbol that will help him feel better about himself. Again, thinking, I have it a lot better than this guy, so I shouldn't really be depressed. But then he dips back in again into this sorrow, and so he says to the leech gatherer again, hey man, what is it that you do? As if he's not even heard what the leech gatherer said. But still, the leech gatherer, of course, tells him, and by the end of the poem, stanza 20, we see this. And soon with this he other matter blended, talks about other things beyond his career. Cheerfully uttered with demeanor kind, but stately in the main. And when he ended, I could have laughed myself to scorn to find in that decrepit man so firm a mind. God, said I, let my help and stay secure. God, said I, be my help and stay secure. I'll think of the leech gatherer on the lonely moor. This leech gatherer has a terrible life, physically demanding. He's poor, but yet he doesn't complain. He's stoic. He is as stable as a rock, like some kind of creature who lives on a rock. He does not complain. He does not waver. He's not mercurial. He seems to be the opposite of this mercurial poet. So we can see this poem as self-therapy in this way. that the poet uses the leech gatherer's life as an occasion to talk himself out of his despair. But I would submit there's another way to think about this poem, which suggests that the speaker is ultimately delusional because he's not really paying attention to the leech gatherer at all. He's paying attention to his own mind. Again, he turns the leech gatherer into a symbol. And then when the leech gatherer talks about his life, he doesn't listen to the leech gatherer. And when he does listen to the leech gatherer, he again turns him into a symbol of rectitude or fortitude, a symbol of what he doesn't have but what he wants. So if we can think of depression, clinical depression, as being alienated from your environment, meaning you're so consumed by your despair that you simply cannot connect meaningfully with people outside of your own skin or with natural phenomena outside of your own skin. If that's the way to think about depression, then the speaker does not move outside of that because he really doesn't move outside of his own skin to connect in a meaningful way with his leech gatherer. He simply transforms the leech gatherer from other to same, from someone different to something identical, because the leech gatherer again becomes a kind of mirror in which the speaker sees values that he wants but doesn't have. So one could say that this final celebration of this newfound strength is delusional because the speaker is still living inside of his head, we would say. And we can imagine probably that he will fall into another fit of despair almost immediately. This isn't to say that Wordsworth is mocking the speaker. It could be to say that this is how depression works. You don't get better necessarily. You might talk yourself into feeling better momentarily, but because you are so solipsistic, caught in your own skull, you're likely to fall into another mood, bad mood, despairing mood almost immediately because you can't latch on anything outside of yourself that might provide lasting interest or affection or connection.